Hey guys, welcome to tonight's Nancy Drew Mystery Hour. I've been reading The Hidden Staircase, and last night Nancy asked her father permission to go to the Turnbull mansion to solve the mystery. He gave his consent, and to play it safe, Nancy only told her father, and she sent a letter to the Turnbull sisters of her impending arrival. However, as we closed last night's adventures, Nancy received a threatening letter. Who could have spilled the beans about where she was going? As I said, she only told 3 people. Let's see what the letter has to say. Chapter 9, The Anonymous Message. Nancy Drew sank down upon the davenport and studied the note which had just been delivered to her door. The message was brief, but its words carried an important veil of violence which mystified and frightened her. It read, "Be warned in time. Keep away from the Turnbull house." The threatening communication was unsigned, but was written in a bold scrawl, and Nancy fancied was unmistakably the handwriting of a man. Who could have sent it? She asked herself in amazement. Why, I've taken special pains not to let anyone know I'm going to the Turnbull house. Even Hannah doesn't know I am to visit there. How could anyone have learned of her plans? Nancy Drew turned this question over in her mind as she sat propped up with pillows in a corner of the big davenport, the very picture of a pretty girl in a brown study over some knotty problem. The more she thought about it, the knottier her problem became, for she had communicated with Rosemary and Floretta by writing, and unless her note to them had been intercepted in the mail, there was no way, to her knowledge, that the information could have been known to a third person. I'm almost tempted to believe in ghosts myself, she thought. It's positively uncanny. She reflected a moment and then chuckled. But anyway, I don't believe the ghost is a very brave one, or he wouldn't be afraid to have me on his trail. As she considered the possibility of danger connected with her visit to the old mansion, the smile faded from her face, and all thoughts about ghosts passed from her mind. The note had frightened her, but it had not deterred her in her purpose to do all within her power to solve the mystery surrounding the mansion. Nancy possessed the fighting instincts of her father, and it would take more than a threat to keep her away from the Turnbull house. She was convinced that the underhand work was going on at the mansion, and she was determined to expose it if it were possible to do so. I think Dad was wise to suggest that I take his revolver, she told herself, and I'll take plenty of ammunition, too. Enough to annihilate an army. Though, truth to tell, I don't know whether I could hit the broadside of a barn or not. Getting up from the davenport, Nancy crossed over to the desk, and with a glance at the window shades to see that they were down, removed the revolver from the drawer. Taking it upstairs, she placed it carefully in her traveling bag. As she started back down the stairs, she heard a light step on the porch. She paused and listened. I wonder if I'm to get another note, flashed through her mind. Before she could move forward, the door opened and Hannah Gruen came in. Oh, it's you, Nancy murmured in relief. Why, yes. Who did you think it was? Well, I didn't know, said Nancy. I wouldn't have been surprised if it were a ghost that had walked in. A ghost? Hannah asked in alarm. What do you mean? Oh, nothing, Nancy assured her hastily. I was only joking. Before the housekeeper could question her further, the girl said good night and retreated to her bedroom. I'll not let that anonymous note disturb my sleep, she told herself resolutely as she tumbled into bed. And tomorrow I'll start for the mansion just as I planned. After she had finished her breakfast at the next morning, Nancy Drew took leave of the housekeeper and, closing up the house, started off for Cliffwood in her roadster. There was not a sign of life about the old stone house as she drove up, and she began to wonder if anything had happened to Rosemary and Floretta since her last visit. However, before she could lift the knocker on the front door, Rosemary greeted her. I saw you coming up the drive. Oh, you don't know how glad we are that you have come, she declared cordially. You see, we were afraid you might change your mind. We couldn't have blamed you if you had. I hope nothing has happened since I was here the other day, Nancy said quickly. Oh, it's been most unbearable. We had made up our minds to leave the place if you didn't come today. Rosemary's face was strained, and Nancy thought she looked as though she had not slept for several nights. The ordeal of remaining in the house was gradually wearing her down. Last night we heard music again, she said in a very low tone. What sort of music? It seemed to come from a stringed instrument. It might have been a guitar. From what part of the house? That was the strange part of it. The sound wasn't localized. It seemed to move from one part of the house to another. Did you hear the music distinctly? No, the sound was muffled, as though it were a long way off. Oh, it was almost ghostly. Rosemary shuddered and turned appealing eyes upon Nancy. Tell me, do you believe in the supernatural? I am almost certain your house is not haunted, Nancy returned firmly, for she saw that Rosemary's iron nerve was beginning to go back on her. How long did the music last? About half an hour, I should judge. Did Miss Floretta hear it too? Oh, yes, she's positively ill this morning. She didn't get out of bed. We'll go to her room now if you like. Perhaps it would be better not to disturb her. Oh, she wanted to see you just as soon as you arrived. Rosemary led the way through the long, dark corridor and to the stairway. I'll show you to your room first, and then you can talk with Floretta, she told Nancy when they reached the upper hall. Rosemary opened a door and permitted Nancy to enter ahead of her. The bedroom was a large, comfortable one, with an old-fashioned canopy bed and heavy mahogany furniture. I have assigned you the room right next to my own, Rosemary explained. If anything should happen during the night, you could rap on the wall or cry out, and I would hear you. Nancy nodded soberly. And the key is in the door, Rosemary continued. Floretta and I always lock our doors. I will lock mine too, Nancy promised. Are you certain you want to go through with it? Rosemary questioned anxiously. If anything should happen to you, I'd never forgive myself. I don't believe anything serious will happen. I wish I could feel as confident, Rosemary sighed. Shall we go get Floretta now? Yes, I am ready. I will unpack my bag later. Nancy followed Rosemary down the hall, and they entered the bedroom in the east wing. Welcome to the haunted house, Floretta murmured a greeting to the girl. She was propped up in bed with cushions, and her face was white and haggard. A tray on a table near the bed had been left practically untouched. Floretta, you didn't eat your breakfast, Rosemary chided gently. Oh, I couldn't, Rosemary. I'm so upset. I can't stay in this horrible place much longer. Miss Drew is here to help us, Rosemary responded quietly. But can she? I'm beginning to doubt that anyone can help us. Nonsense. You mustn't let your nerves get the best of you. I think I can help, Nancy smiled reassuringly. At least, I will do my best. I intend to go all over the house and see if I can locate secret panels or trap doors. I don't believe it will do any good, Floretta declared pessimistically. I've never heard of anything like that in the house. I may as well have a look anyway, Nancy said easily. She remembered something which she intended to ask the Turnbull sisters. Tell me, did you mention to anyone that I was coming here for a visit? No, Rosemary answered promptly. We took care not to mention it to a soul. Of course, we talked about your note when it came, Floretta added, but we didn't let out a hint of its contents to anyone. Why do you ask? Nancy hesitated, then deciding that it could do no particular harm to tell the Turnbull sisters of the note she had received, she related what had happened the previous night. Someone warned you not to come here, Floretta gasped. Why, how could the news have gotten out? I wish I knew, Nancy admitted. It would seem as though the walls have ears. She lowered her voice. For even now, someone may be listening to every word we say. Chapter 10. An Unfruitful Search. Nancy Drew's presence in the mansion had a wholesome effect upon the Turnbull sisters, for soon after her arrival they became more cheerful. Floretta announced that she felt a great deal better and insisted upon getting up and dressing. To the surprise of her sister, she appeared most cheerful when she came downstairs for luncheon. Tell me, does this house have any particular history? Nancy questioned as the three set the table. Oh, yes, indeed, Rosemary responded proudly. It was built in the early days when stone houses were out of the ordinary. Of course, the mansion had been remodeled many times, but the original walls still stand. The property has never passed from the Turnbull family. To your knowledge, there are no secret panels or trapdoors in the house. I know of none. However, Floretta and I were never interested in such things until recently, and I'll admit we haven't gone over the house carefully. It's possible something like that was built when the house was remodeled in Civil War times, as a protective measure, you know. Then, if you have no objections, I believe I'll have a look around and see if I can locate anything unusual. Certainly, Rosemary assured her. You're free to do anything you like, and we'll help you all we can. Where will you start? I may as well begin in the attic and work down. If you go up there, you'll need a candle. It's very dark. You see, we've never had the house wired for electricity. Rosemary hurried to the kitchen and returned in a few minutes with half a dozen large tallow candles. Before concentrating her attention upon the attic, Nancy made a preliminary survey of the entire mansion. The house consisted of 15 large rooms. On the first floor, in addition to the kitchen, butler's pantry, and dining room, there was a drawing room, a library, a sun parlor, and a reception hall. Directly beneath the first floor was the basement, which had been broken up into storerooms. The second floor was devoted to bedchambers. Rosemary explained that one wing of the house had been shut off for years, and this portion of the house at once aroused Nancy's interest. However, a casual survey of the rooms revealed nothing which would indicate that anyone had visited them in the last 6 years. A thick accumulation of dust was undisturbed. "We'll try the attic first," Nancy decided. "Later, I'll go over these other rooms more carefully." Single file, Nancy and the two ladies trudged up the narrow stairs leading to the attic. As Nancy opened a door at the head of the stairs, a gust of wind struck her candle and extinguished the flame. Quickly lighting it, she stepped into the attic. She glanced about it curiously, flashing the light into every nook and corner. The attic appeared little different from others Nancy had visited. It was filled with pieces of discarded furniture. A tall highboy stood in one corner, a broken rocking chair in another, and boxes were piled everywhere. Systematically, Nancy poked into the boxes and went over the walls inch by inch. The latter had a hollow sound, but she was unable to find a spring which would open a panel. If the walls guarded a secret, they guarded it well. "I guess there's nothing here," Nancy admitted after she had spent nearly an hour in the attic. She was reluctant to leave, for although she had unearthed nothing, she could not help but feel that she had overlooked something of vital importance. "I was afraid you wouldn't find anything," Rosemary commented as she turned toward the stairs. "Now where? Shall we try the basement?" The three made their way cautiously down the stairs to the first floor, and from there to the kitchen. As they descended into the dark cellar, an unpleasant musty odor assailed their nostrils. A few minutes' search convinced Nancy that the basement was not worth bothering about. The floors and walls had been covered with cement and offered no possibility of a trapdoor. However, before returning to the first floor, she looked carefully about in the storerooms to make certain that no one was hiding in there. "Well, our search wasn't very well rewarded," Nancy admitted after the three had returned to the kitchen. "But I'm not ready to give up yet. I intend to have another look tomorrow." The investigation of the attic and the basement had taken the better part of the afternoon, and already shadows were beginning to lurk in the nooks and crannies. With the approach of night, the house seemed to take on a more formidable atmosphere. Dinner at the mansion was a rather strained, formal affair. Rosemary and Nancy made an attempt to keep up a conversation, but without much success. There was a tenseness in the air which everyone felt. After dinner, the three adjourned to the drawing-room. Rosemary sat down at the piano and tried to play, but Nancy noticed that her hands trembled. After a time, she gave it up. Floretta was even less composed than her sister. She sat rigidly on the sofa with hands tightly clasped. Involuntarily, her eyes roved about the room as though she were looking for someone. "What an odd piece of furniture," Nancy commented in an attempt to start a conversation. "Which piece do you mean?" Rosemary questioned. "The sofa. I never saw one like it." "I don't wonder. It's built in." "Built in? How odd. I've seen built-in bookcases and window seats, but I have never heard of a built-in sofa." "It was our great-grandfather's idea," Floretta explained. "I could never see any sense in it myself. I'd much rather have a sofa that could be moved about." At 9 o'clock, Nancy announced that she would retire, and in obvious relief, Floretta and Rosemary rose to follow her example. "Don't forget to lock your door," Rosemary warned her guest as she said good night at the head of the stairs. "And if anything should happen, scream. We'll hear you." As soon as she was alone in her bedchamber, Nancy Drew locked the door. Then she made a hasty examination of the closet. There was nothing inside. She looked under the bed. "There's nothing like caution," she assured herself. "I don't believe a ghost will get in here very easily, but just the same, I'll be prepared." Unlocking her travel bag, she removed the revolver her father had given her and a flashlight she had thoughtfully included as part of her emergency equipment. Carefully loading the revolver, she placed it under her pillow. "There," she exclaimed with satisfaction. "Any ghost that comes prowling about is apt to meet with a warm reception." With that, she sprang into bed. She did not intend to fall asleep at once, but before she knew it, she had dozed off. When she awoke, the sun was streaming in through the bedroom window. With a start, Nancy Drew opened her eyes and glanced about the room. So far as she could tell, everything was exactly as she had left it. Hurriedly dressing, she went downstairs. Rosemary and Floretta were already there ahead of her, and breakfast was nearly ready. "Did you sleep well?" Rosemary asked her. "Like a log. I scarcely shut my eyes all night." "But surely nothing happened to alarm you?" she asked. "No, I didn't hear a sound." After breakfast, Nancy once more began the task of investigating the walls of the various rooms in hope of discovering a sliding panel. She spent the morning going over the downstairs rooms. She tapped the walls with a small hammer and even looked behind the heavy pictures. "I'm certain there must be a secret opening in this house somewhere," she told herself, "but it doesn't look as though I'm going to find it very easily." In the afternoon she devoted her attention to the bedrooms, but without success. That night she again slept with a revolver under her pillow. The next day was a repetition of the one that had gone before. Nancy began to wonder if there really was a mystery connected to the old house. "Can it be that Rosemary and Floretta only imagine strange things that have happened?" she asked herself. That night, when she retired, she was half inclined not to place the revolver under her pillow as usual, for it seemed a rather unnecessary precaution. Upon second thought, however, she decided it would be wise not to take a chance. After climbing into bed and blowing out the light, she did not fall asleep at once. The window curtains were up, permitting the moonlight to stream in, and for some time Nancy watched the shadows of the trees dance on the white walls of her room. "I wonder if those shadows were the ones Rosemary and Floretta saw," she thought. About half an hour she dozed off, but she did not sleep soundly. She awoke in the middle of the night and found that she could not go back to slumber. "What is the matter with me?" she asked herself. "I feel just as if something were about to happen." The house was quiet as a tomb, yet there was something about the silence which was ominous. "This will never do," Nancy chided herself severely as she felt a cold chill creeping over her. Resolutely she closed her eyes, but sleep would not come. She tried the time-worn device of counting sheep, but in vain. It was as though a faculty over which she had no control had elected to maintain a vigil. Restlessly, Nancy Drew tossed about. Then, just as she was sinking into a light asleep, she was aroused rudely. What was it that had awakened her? She sat up in bed and tried to pierce the darkness. Then she heard a noise which seemed to come from the floor below. There was a dull thud, and then a blood-curdling yell. After that, silence. What do you think happened? Did the ghost appear? Was it the ghost that screamed, or was it one of the sisters? Tune in tomorrow night, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, to find out what it was. See you guys.